everybody. So you're probably wondering why I called you all here. If you thought his jokes are bad, mine are going to be way worse. Sorry.
Oh, way worse.
So my name's Art Sturdman. I'm from Duo Security. I'm a security engineer there. This is a colleague of mine. This is Mike Toole.
How you doing?
Mike has been with Duo for I can't even tell you how long. I've been there 2 years, and it seems like forever at this point, just because we have so many new people. I can't even imagine how it feels for you.
Yeah, about 4 years, and it's twice as long.
Yeah. So the story that we're going to tell you today happened about 2 years ago. It was actually maybe just a couple months after I started, and I'll let Mike set the scene for you, but it was a brand new office. The space was newly renovated, and then the Kool-Aid Man came.
Oh, Kool-Aid Man.
Yeah. So I'll walk you through the technical background of what we did. I'm going to walk you through the panic mode that we experienced. We'll tell you the rest of the story. We'll tell you what lessons we learned that you could employ in your enterprise. And then we'll talk about other recommendations that you might be able to employ. And some of these are going to be kind of weird. Before we get too far, we're not lawyers. We have people from all walks of life, all different countries, all different states. I can't tell you legally what works for you. I can only tell you that when we talked to our counsel as we were walking through and going through this exercise, they had a much bigger appetite for risk than even I thought they were going to. So that enabled us to do some interesting things. That said, you may see some things in here that maybe don't apply to you. Sorry.
Yeah, also, if you don't have counsel, you might want to get counsel, or at least ask someone, so.
Yeah. So I'll turn it over to Mike, and he'll tell us a little bit about the Kool-Aid Man.
All right. So, oh no.
You gotta hit the right button.
Buttons are hard sometimes.
All right. Go for it.
Okay, well, that's a GIF fail apparently. So, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit. Going back a couple years, you know, hyper-growth stage company, you got a brand new office. Even though it's brand new, everything's under construction. It's in a shared environment, so you've got like common areas with other companies, and just stuff everywhere, right? So I come into work one day in the morning. I get there, first one there. Great, ready to start, you know. And I go to my desk, and then I look up, and I notice, there's a TV on the floor, and it's got a bunch of drywall attached to it. That's not normal. And then my first thought was, those damn contractors mounted it wrong. And I look a little further, and I was like, that cabinet's where we store new MacBooks. It doesn't have any MacBooks in it. That seems odd to me. So I called a few people over, and we're trying to figure this out. And we realized very quickly that a certain individual, we'll call him Kool-Aid Man, had decided to gain access to the common area of the building and then find a few boxes and random things to stand on, climb through the ceiling tiles, and then kick through the drywall where there was a TV mounted on the other side to gain access to this fancy new office space to look for things to steal. The rough timeline was somewhere over the night. We weren't really sure exactly. But anyways, so it started this, you know, like, oh no, like, what now? And from there, we just kind of panicked, and it was just like, well, what do we do? Okay, well, let's start to form a plan, right? And I guess we can start.
Yeah. Sorry, moving us along. All right, so the nice part about this is we kind of had a plan that we knew we were going to follow, but actually executing it, we hadn't had to tackle this before. You know, when I came into Duo, we were right around 100 employees, and we really hadn't had any assets go missing yet. So we knew that we have DEP. We knew that we had an inventory system, and of course, we knew that we had Jamf, which is the MDM. And being able to make use of of this circle here, by taking advantage of all three of these things, we were able to A, realize very quickly that these laptops were missing. We knew immediately which laptops were missing, and we knew that they were brand new and didn't have anything on them, which was really helpful because it meant that the legal team was like, just see if you can get them back. Is more or less what happened. I'm not...
That's paraphrasing.
Yeah. So, they gave us the green light to do a little digging. So if you're not using DEP in your organization now, definitely take a look at adding that to your workflow because it's a lifesaver. When that computer boots up for the very first time, it'll actually check in with that server. And this actually turned out to be the key to the whole thing. This kicked off all of the rest of the stuff that Mike's going to tell us about. So with Jamf reporting in to the DEP, the MDM, and the inventory cycle, and users reporting into this cycle, you can very quickly get an idea of exactly what's going on in your inventory. And when things go missing, people have a way to tell you, which is super cool and super helpful. All right. So Mike, tell us a little bit about the Kool-Aid Man.
Yeah, so the Kool-Aid Man is obviously a thief, right? We've just nicknamed the Kool-Aid Man to just make it easier to kind of illustrate a picture of this guy. And like, why does Kool-Aid Man? Oh yeah, right? Like, why on earth would some dude just show up at an office and bust through a drywall ceiling and then steal a bunch of laptops? Well, obviously to sell them, right? Like, he's opportunistic. He's in it for the money. He probably thinks he's smarter than you. That may be the case. It's probably not, though. And then, honestly, like, his motivation is to get a thing, convert that to money as quick as possible, and, like, be on his merry way, right? So that kind of lends into, like, where do these things end up? Typically, you see that stuff get dumped very quickly, right? So within a matter of, like, hours or a day or so, it's going to be in the hands of somebody else, whether or not that's, like, Craigslist or Facebook or however they decide to, like, dump the laptop, street corner, I don't know, right? Like, I don't really care. But that's typically what happens is Kool-Aid Man is going to try to get rid of these laptops because why does Kool-Aid Man need to sit on a stack of laptops like he doesn't, right? So, and with that, we kind of had a fun side story. Once we found that these were missing, our company's pretty open, so it was like shared out that hey, we had an incident. Like, here's what happened. Nothing was, no like actual data was lost. This was just new laptops. Like, great. And working for a security company is very interesting because you get certain individuals that take initiative to try to help out, right? So we had a few like security engineers just like looking on Craigslist and try to find like, oh, there's this match, like this model number, including one person who found someone selling a, quote, trunk full of MacBooks from a mall parking lot.
That's where you do your Christmas shopping,
yeah.
I've got news for you.
Right. Probably, it sounded very sketchy, so he social engineered the fellow to just give him very like identifiable characteristics about these MacBooks and like got him to read off the serial number on the bottom of it. Sad news was they weren't ours.
The sadder news for the dude was that they were someone else's.
Yeah.
And so sorry.
Yeah, so we turned that evidence over to the police, and they ended up catching some other guy that had stolen a, quote, trunk full of MacBooks from somewhere.
I would say if you go any place where they're selling a trunk load of MacBooks, you should be suspicious.
Yeah. So that was just like a fun side story, but so some more things about the Kool-Aid Man. He may not open it, but someone will, right? Like, this is a laptop that they're selling for profit. Like, someone is going to use this thing. So you have a pretty good chance of trying to get in the middle of the cycle there to check in your MDM or DEP. Like, that is the key. Basically getting in the process of like, hey, they opened a thing, like, gotcha, right? You want to be right in that process of setup, which is DEP and Jamf. So,
Yeah. All right, so the laptops have gone missing. We caught one criminal. Oops. But what happens if this happens to you? These laptops didn't have anything on them, and that was really fortunate for us. It meant that we could take our time with this, and we could formulate a plan, and we could do this research. But what happens when it's not an empty laptop? And so the best case scenario, or the best things that you could do, is log out of everything. Once the user has notified you that that laptop is missing, make sure that they're logged out of any company websites. Make sure they're logged out of everything. Social media, any banking software that they have, any assets that your company might have, make sure they log out of all that stuff. Also, change their Apple password. A lot of users have iMessage set up on their endpoints, or they have iCloud or something like that, which if the criminal was to gain access to that laptop, maybe it's not encrypted, maybe their password, despite all the warnings that you've given them, is really crummy. If they get into that laptop, now they have access to that person's social media and their iMessage, and they can start doing some pretty nasty things to your employee, which you probably don't want. Also, if you have anything that SMSs one-time passwords to your users, they now have access to those codes as well. And so we go from a stolen laptop to now a stolen account, and that could be much worse. You can attempt to lock it via Jamf and Apple. Obviously, they have very easy capabilities for that built in. Your mileage may vary, though. Some users, some laptops, it just doesn't work for some reason. Maybe the computer doesn't check into Jamf anymore. Maybe it hasn't been provisioned with Jamf. Again, mileage may vary, but this is not the worst way to go. Filing a police report, also a pretty big deal. This gives the cops a heads up that, hey, these assets are missing, this asset is missing. If you do file that, just ask the police, if they're gonna come to your office, don't have them park out front of your office. That only gets people asking questions about what happened. Was it a murder? Was it something happened? No, somebody stole a laptop, no big deal. But you don't need people poking around your office asking questions.
sure.
And then ask them not to discuss the case. Obviously, most law professionals are not going to do that anyways, but it's always a good idea just to cover that so that they know that this is sensitive, and you don't necessarily want your name in the news. To increase recovery chances, this is not something we were able to do in this case, but as we went back through and kind of looked at what we did and what we could have done better, some of these laptops had already moved. And what we could have done, since we were able to recover them, what we could have done with Jamf and the MDM is we could have set a logon banner via the configuration profile and pushed that down to the machine. Setting up a phone number to make it easy to recover the assets, super simple. You can set up a Google Voice number. Just have them leave a message and put that in your logon banner. Just have them send you a text message even. This is super, most people are good. And if they know that they've purchased stolen goods accidentally or otherwise, and they know that you know that they purchased those goods, there's a very good chance that if they know that they might be able to get off the hook for that, they might just send you a text message and say, hey, I accidentally got this laptop.
From a trunk.
Yeah. Accidentally acquired this laptop, or I found it. It was just hanging out, and I took it home. If they can have a friction-free process for reporting that back to you, maybe a self-reporting website, maybe it's a text message or a phone call to a voicemail box, that's not the worst. Offering a reward can be pro-con. You definitely don't want people stealing things from you in order to get the money back in rewards, right? So again, you have to evaluate the risks that you're willing to take on, and you have to evaluate, is it worth it to give a $500 reward for a laptop that maybe costs you $2,000? I don't know. I can't answer that question for you, but it's worth looking at. There we go.
So now we get into what did we do, right? And so the first thing we thought is like, okay, well, there's a good chance they're going to open it. We have DEP set up. Let's start to do stuff, right? And we also thought like, well, okay, so anyone that's doing this is probably going to reimage it. Even though these are new, they don't know that like what's on them, right? So they're probably going to reimage it back to factory. So timing here is super critical, and I can't stress this enough. If you don't have DEP set up, that's a thing that takes quite a while with Apple, just doing the dance of like, I'm a corporate company, you know, set me up in your fancy portal, and then getting it pointed at Jamf and doing the APNS stuff. So if you can have that set up, even if you're not using it ahead of time, that is like huge, right? Because you want to be able to just kick that off without having to do any setup. Okay, so we have DEP. So we're going to use DEP to install npm Jamf. And what that looks like is a pre-stage enrollment, a separate one if you're using normal DEP to install your Jamf, because you want to keep this separate, right? You're doing weird stuff. We're going to do weird stuff, not a normal user workflow. So you want to keep it all separate. So we're going to turn recurring check-in up to 11. And kind of the background here is like, you're going to set up a pre-stage enrollment, okay? That's going to key off something. You're going to put people in a smart group. It doesn't matter how you do any of this. This is up to you guys, right? This is just like the kind of key things that you want to do. So you can do smart group, say stolen laptops, right? And then you're going to have some policies that key off that smart group. So like, I'm not even kidding. Like, turn it all the way up, right? Like, check in as much data as you want, or can. So, like have it run every minute, every 30 seconds. I don't care, right? Like, these people don't care. It's not their laptop. So, you're gonna want to gather user information. Jamf does a really good job of this just out of the box, right? We found that people setting up laptops, like, regardless of where they got it, they honestly just use their real name, right? So this is, you know, Mike Tool's laptop, miketool.local. So it's actually like a pretty good way to figure out, like, okay, well, we can start there. We have user information. This is a person. They have a name, right? Wi-Fi data. It's a thing you can just scan for with the OS. This is a very easy script to write. It's like a one-liner. So, and then Bluetooth data, like that is also a one-liner script. And you can return as much stuff as you want to the JSS in just log format. So host name sometimes is useful, right? Like it's going to use the actual username generally unless they're setting that up themselves. And then IP address. That is okay, I guess, right? It really just depends on where they're at. So sometimes it'll be like their ISP that's halfway across the state or whatever local node they're on. Sometimes it is like a corporate office and it's very geolocatable. Just depends. So, but having all of this information is super critical. So Wi-Fi data. This right here is a fun little script, just taking advantage of native OS X stuff. It will literally just list out like anything that it sees that it's scanning for Wi-Fi, right? And that may seem stupid, but it's actually super useful because you can do things like, oh, there's an SSID that's like Bill's local coffee shop, you know, .public or something, or so-and-so municipal Wi-Fi, right? And you can kind of get an idea of like, okay, well, they're around this area. Bluetooth data. Same thing, right? This is all native stuff. You can just scan for Bluetooth devices. People will, you know, like this isn't just things that are connected, right? Like this is going to be anything that is around that laptop that that it can find. So, which is also useful, like so-and-so's Apple phone, right? Like iPhone. It really is like very useful stuff. So, and with this, you also want to turn this up to 11, right? Like, have this policy run these scripts and just check in all the time. Like, there's no reason not to.
If your thief complains about battery life, that's okay.
Like, you're doing something right if you're draining their battery. So keep collecting, right? Get as much data as you can. And look at the data, right? Like this is the kind of thing where you could script it, you could try to get it out and make it look fancy. You could also just like look at it, right? Like we're all smart people. We can kind of correlate things and data. So like just set regular intervals, right? We were doing it about every hour we would kind of check back in after we kick this off. So keep looking at the data, right? Like for as long as you can, I guess, right? Like until it gets useful. See if the data changes over time, right? Like, is this laptop moving around? We definitely have seen that. So it was here, now it's here. That's interesting, right? Maybe the name changed. Maybe it got wiped again. Maybe they thought their machine was broken, so they re-imaged it because the battery wasn't working quite as they expected.
One of the things we found is that the DEP, they definitely noticed it, but they didn't. They just thought it was something they could go around if they re-imaged it enough times. And so the same thief took the same laptop and imaged it and imaged it and imaged it, thinking that they were going to get a different result. And all we got was better data. So, where we had first initial, last name, now we have the full name, and we have the full name and the middle name. And I mean, at some point I thought they were just going to give us their address and their spouse's name and their name of their kids and the social security number. That didn't happen, but every time they re-imaged it, we got more information. It was fantastic.
So we kind of have moved past the information collecting, and that's just some basic stuff you can do. There are other tools like I know people have used Prey. That's something we looked at. It kind of gets into a little more of a creepy vibe than we wanted. So there's some of that. Like, I don't know that I want to see someone open their laptop in their bedroom, ever, right? And collecting screen recordings, it gets sketchy. So we have all this data. It's fairly useful. You can correlate this with very public information to do what we call doxing, right? Some of you may be familiar with that, also known as open source intelligence gathering. Honestly, the internet is just full of a ton of stuff that's free and scary. So use that data, right? And the other thing to know here is it's probably not Kool-Aid Man that you're looking at, right? This is somebody else that bought the machine or came across it or whatever, right? So what you're trying to do here is tie that back to Kool-Aid Man. So as many of the people that you can, in our case it was 10 laptops. So that's a pretty good coverage as far as people to correlate back to Kool-Aid Man. So names and general location, huge, super powerful data. You would be surprised, and unless you're getting a John Smith, it is fairly easy to correlate a single person with a relatively unique name with those two pieces of data. And phone number. That's a thing some people put in their profile. I don't know why. You can collect that with the JSS, through various methods, just from their user profile. Sure, okay. Also very useful. So, and then we get back to just finding this stuff on the internet's kind of almost too easy sometimes, and scary. So here's a fun website called Wiggle. It basically is, there's lots of people that are into Wi-Fi hacking. They just roam around and scan SSID locations and then report it back to this website. There's a lot of people that do it. It's kind of scary. So you can very easily geolocate an SSID, especially if it's unique. You might have a little trouble with Xfinity Wi-Fi or some of the other more public ones. It's kind of interesting. This is SSIDs that just have Jamf in the name around Minneapolis. So pretty nice heat map. So wiggle.net, very useful stuff. There's also an API, so that script could very easily turn into, hey, call Wiggle and return some coordinates for me if you want. That's a very easy thing to do. We just didn't really have time to do it. So this is also fun too. Spokio, super creepy site. It's basically geared towards, hey, I haven't seen this person in forever. I want to find them. That's not what people use it for. Yeah. It is a paid site. It's about, I think it's like $10 a month. Totally worth it. Yeah. Like fun side note, I forgot my dad's address to his new house the other day, so I just looked him up on here via public information, and it was accurate. So, and the way the site works is, you know, even if you have like a few pieces of information, you can look up like last names and like general locations, and it'll list off, oh, hey, here's a list of people with that last name and their first name and middle initial and like a phone number. And they're kind of in this general location. And that's where the location data comes in really handy, because you can kind of tune like, okay, well, it's probably within a degree of certainty one of these 5 people. And then you can go into like, look at social media, right? Like, this is all like open stuff. Most people don't lock their profiles down, especially Facebook. You can go in there, oh, hey, like, looks like this person's related to this other person. They're also married to this person. Like these people are constantly posting on their timeline. They probably know each other, right? You need to be really careful here in using your personal accounts to do some of this looking, right? Like LinkedIn is a great example. Like every time you look at a person's profile, it tells them you did that, right? So like creating fake accounts, it's pretty easy. Like if you want to go that route, just be very careful not to like post on their pictures like, oh, hey, like that looks like a great vacation, you know? Like you don't know these people, you don't want to know these people. You just want to find as much stuff about them as you can. So, so handing over the data, this was interesting. You want to, so this is handing over the data to the police, right? Like you've gathered all this information. You can kind of go, okay, well, we have these 8 people. We have a pretty good idea that they're the ones that have our laptops. Like we have all this data, like we correlated it, here's all our sources. Now you have to basically translate that to a police officer who is probably not familiar with most of this. It is probably also as creeped out as most people would be that you found all of this data.
I believe a direct quote was, oh wow, we would have decided to send this to the lab and we would have gotten it back in like 2 months.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think I also heard wow, this would have required a subpoena normally. So, yeah, so choosing a delegate's pretty useful here, because you want to have one person for the police to talk with, and if they have questions, right, like you have that one contact, you're not miscommunicating across people. You also may be called into court, so decide who wants to do that, because whoever talks to the police is generally going to be the one that's called into court. Yeah, so package things up, you're going to have data from all over the place, right? Maybe different formats depending on what you do. Just Excel spreadsheets, keep this simple, right? Police do not have time to convert a CSV to whatever tab delimited, you know what I mean? You literally just want to give them a thing that they can open and look at, right? And then you can also sit down with them and go through. So, yeah. And you're definitely going to have to go through it, right? They're just going to be okay, why do you have all this data? How did you get this? Did you legally get this? Also, how did you get this, right? So being able to explain that is huge as well. And also, I wouldn't think of this as evidence, right? You are not creating an evidence chain. What you're creating is information that the police can act on. So they're going to take this information and then go create evidence and find people and knock on doors. And hey, you have a MacBook. Can I check the serial number, right? Oh, hey, there's some evidence. So this is literally data that the police can go and use as actionable data. So yeah, let the police do that, right? I know I live in Michigan, but I don't get issued a gun at work. So That's not my job. I don't want to like be hunting down bad guys like in the physical meat space. I'm happy to do it online and then turn it over. So, and then you just wait, honestly. Like, we did a pretty good job. Like, we packaged this all up and like turned it over to the police, and then they usually won't tell you what's going on. You may have to like check in with them, but like at some point you will just find out like, hey, what happened to Kool-Aid Man? Oh yeah, we caught him within 24 hours, which was crazy. Him and like 5 other people that he had sold laptops to recovered all the laptops, which is insane. And Kool-Aid Man was like a month out of probation, headed back, I guess.
Yeah.
So
He had a nice vacation, I guess.
yeah, probably, you know, like if I could give Kool-Aid Man advice, I would say like, don't steal things from a security company. Probably a bad move. But yeah, like, so it was really helpful for the police, and we talked to them afterwards, and they were just like, you know, like, we don't know how you got this data, like, but we were able to use it to convert that to, oh yeah, like, we know about this guy that is well known for doing stuff like this in your area, or like, you know, we're knocking on doors and this person told us, oh, I got the laptop from this guy, and like, oh, it's stolen? I had no idea, right? Like, so yeah, like super useful stuff.
Yeah. So making loss less frightening. So we were able to catch the Kool-Aid Man. Again, these assets didn't have anything on them, so it wasn't that frightening for us to begin with. But things do occasionally go missing, and so what we've done in the retrospect is to make sure that all of our laptops are in that ideal state. And so Jamf has really helped us with this, enforcing a strong user password, making sure that full disk encryption is enabled. If you're not doing this now, I can't stress this enough. It's super easy to do. It is a checkbox or a one-liner, depending on how you want to do it, and it's seamless for the user. MDM auto-enrollment via DEP was the other big hero of this story. What enabled us to initially start digging in and finding all this information was that the laptops automatically checked in and downloaded their MDM profile from Jamf. And then when that user registered his name and all that other information about him, it got reported up to our server, and we were able to do something with that. So I can't sing the merits of DEP loudly enough. If you're not using it yet, get on that bus, because it's pretty cool.
It's a fancy bus.
It is. It's a little bit of a pain to set up, but it is pretty neat. The other parts of an ideal laptop state is very often when laptops go missing, it's from coffee shops, bars, places where people were working on it recently and then walked away or turned around for a second and the laptop was open, or maybe it had just closed and it hadn't timed out. What we do is we set a screensaver lock and timeout. So if you walk away from your computer for longer than X amount of time, it automatically locks for you. You know, if you configure your computer correctly to forget the file vault password when it goes to sleep or hibernates, that's one more step that you could do to make sure that if somebody does get access to that, it's that much harder for them to actually get into the device and get the data. If you can set a firmware password, that's awesome. That will certainly help you out in a lot of different ways. This might interfere with being able to re-image the machine, though. So again, mileage might vary on that, but it's not the worst plan. And then make sure your device is up to date. I will always tell you that having an up-to-date device is like that is the standard you want to shoot for. If your device is up to date and you've got File Vault enabled and all the other goodness that comes with your Apple computer, you're in a really good spot. If that computer goes missing, log them out of all the stuff, and you can be pretty sure that as long as the computer was locked when it got stolen, or you know, the user didn't have an active account open on the machine, you can be pretty confident that data is probably secure, and then you can try to wipe it or you can try to get it back if that's what you're interested in doing. There we go. All right, so some other things you can do. We didn't do this, but this was just walking through like a brainstorming exercise. Like, how can you get weird with it? How can you really up the ante and either recover your device or maybe make a sweet, you know, pocket of change in the meantime?
Or just have fun, honestly. Like,
It all depends on your scenario. and if you're interested in doing this. So one of the things that you might look at is moving your devices to a separate DEP or Jamf server, the stolen devices. And the reason that I would recommend this is that a year down the road, you haven't heard from that asset. 2 years down the road, you haven't heard from that asset. They're still in that group. But now your IT organization has rolled over and you've got churn. Maybe the stuff in that device pile or that smart group is named intelligently so that people know, oh, okay, these are stolen devices. I shouldn't do anything with those. But when you have that kind of churn that you often see in an IT organization, that knowledge can get forgotten. And when that happens, people start scoping policies incorrectly. And so you might have policies that just go to these stolen computers that all of a sudden accidentally get included to your fleet. And now you've locked your entire fleet of computers out. Or the opposite happens, where maybe those assets have checked in, but you haven't been able to recover them, and they're still in Jamf, and you accidentally push down sensitive data to them. So there's a real case to be made here for finding either a backup server or a different Jamf service that you could take advantage of to push these into so that they're not managed with your corporate infrastructure. Again, collect as much information as possible. You can do some really interesting stuff. What Mike was telling you about really helps you narrow down the scope of where this person is and who they are. And then when you give that to the police, like Mike said, in this case, they kind of already knew. Like, they heard the name and they're like, oh, it's that dude. And they were just able to go find him. One of the things you can do for fun and profit is you can encrypt the drive and remove the user from File Vault, and then set a configuration profile to set the login banner to say, hey, if you pay us 1 Bitcoin, we'll unlock this computer for you. So it doesn't have to be all just, getting it back. Sometimes you can just get rid of the asset, call it a day.
Yeah, your accounting department might hate you when you give them a Bitcoin and say, hey, file this for us.
Yeah, I don't know what the tax implications are, but again, that might be a fun thing to work through depending on what your appetite is. But we were just having fun with it, kind of brainstorming around, and that's where this came from. So things you probably shouldn't do. Like Mike said, we investigated Prey. It's a really neat tool if you're not familiar with it. You can push it out to a laptop, and if it gets stolen, you slam the big red button that says, my device is missing, and it will start checking into the server, just like Jamf will, and it'll start collecting all the information. But it will also take screenshots every 30 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it's configured to.
It will turn the camera on.
It'll turn the camera on and take photos. If you work in education, you're probably already thinking, oh my goodness, that's awful. Because you don't know where these laptops are going, and they move so quickly. It's really easy for these laptops to go to a parent or to a child or to a stepchild or something like that, and now you're in a really weird space that you probably don't want to be into. So my personal recommendation is probably avoid that. Jamf offers enough tools and enough functionality combined with what Apple offers to be able to give the police a really healthy amount of evidence to get that stuff back. So in summary, make sure you have a plan. Make sure you have a plan before you need a plan. Make sure your infrastructure is set up to support that plan. So if you are planning to try and recover assets when they go missing, this is a valuable step. You can't spend enough time doing this. Yep. And it's not enough to just make sure that you have it. Sit everybody down in the room and have like a war room exercise. Have like a D&D session where this laptop has gone missing. Start with a laptop with no data scenario. Move up to the CEO's laptop went missing. And then formulate and revise your plan based on that.
Also, just know you'll probably never like consistently roll 20s. So
yes. So with that, I think that concludes our presentation. Thank you guys so much for coming and paying attention. I appreciate it.
All right, and with that, we can start Q&A. I was thinking of one question while I was sitting there, if I may.
Sure.
Do you guys have a picture of what it looked like, the damage?
We tried to find it and we couldn't.
we did,
Darn.
yeah. It's just, it's like you switch chat apps and all your stuff's gone.
Yeah.
All right, sir.
Hey, a couple of questions about DEP. One, do I understand correctly that can only be enforced or enacted on new machines that you're purchasing? It can't be retroactively introduced to devices you already own. Is that right?
That's a really good point. The purchasing workflow is also pretty key here too. You can get them into DEP, but it's a lot harder and requires, calling people and special favors if you just straight up buy them from the Apple Store with a credit card. So you're going to want to be set up with like the purchasing portal and have all that set up ahead of time, basically so that Apple knows that you as an organization own this device.
And then my other question about DEP is, can it be, do we have to protect against that being circumvented in any way? Is that what the firmware password can accomplish?
Sure. Yeah, that's a thing. It's also, and this is where we get into like, maybe you want to set up a separate server for this, right? Because now you do have a Jamf binary on this stolen device. And depending on your threat model, I mean, it really just depends on what you're comfortable with for risk and how you're actually deploying things to your users, right? Like, if that device is trusted or not, right? So it could be useful. There's a scenario where the machine's offline.
I think what this comes down to your question, it can be bypassed. It's not like a perfect solution to everything, but for most criminals, they're going to do the easiest thing they can, and they're going to open it, and they're going to try to wipe it, and that's where DEP is really the savior here.
And just to add something from the Jamf perspective on your question, DEP, if you're not connected to a network, you won't see that screen. But there is, on some of the later versions of macOS, an irritation box that comes up that prompts you and continues to prompt you every like 5 to 10 minutes if you do get to the main screen. iOS is completely different, and iOS is required to go through DEP because there is an online activation process.
I just wanted to add that we've used the Jamf Pro and everything to also catch criminal and everything like that. The person booted into the recovery partition, set up their own user, so they were a little bit smarter than wiping the machine, but then it kept checking in. They'd set up the account with their name. We had their IP address. So then we looked them up on Facebook, gave the police their picture, and police got the subpoenaed for Verizon for the address and everything. Basically, it was the only reason they said that they were able to catch the person. Unfortunately, we've had a lot less success lately because we add a firmware password, so now somebody can't boot up or anything like that. Any ideas on like how to do, if there's a firmware password or a login password, they literally have a brick now at that point. Like,
yeah, it really comes down to what your threat model is.
Yeah.
In some scenarios, maybe a firmware password doesn't make sense, but depending on the assets you're trying to protect, it really just comes down to what your company is comfortable with, and you have to make that trade-off.
And that's where like a tabletop exercise is super valuable to just identify like what's valuable to you, right, in the scenario, and like what you're comfortable with doing to recover stuff.
there was also, just to add one more thing, I remember that I can't remember the site, but there was a site that also had an API so you could get it to text you. So it ran so I had set up a policy so, at check-in or something, or if it changed its address, it would text me, and so I didn't have to go and look at the Jamf server.
Yeah, one fun thing that I found too is looking at this. You can enable location data via a native app if you want, and that's a thing that I played with. It will always prompt the user though,
Yeah.
so sometimes you can get them to click OK.
One more question.
So yeah, you kind of led into it. Because on the laptop you can skip the Wi-Fi setup and then bypass DEP. Since that is actually checking into the DEP server with Apple and you're their customer, do you know if Apple is willing to share that information of what IP address that request came from?
I believe you can actually query it through the APNS API. So a colleague of ours, Papine, wrote a wrapper. You could, if you want to get crazy, you could probably request that data from the API. Okay. You may, depending on your relationship with Apple, maybe. I don't know.
Right.
I've asked that question of our Apple rep. The answer is no. But that's a better idea.
Yeah.
And then at the end, if you could put that script up again for collecting Wi-Fi data and all that.
Yeah, and I think these are shared out too, right?
Yep, the slides and presentation are recorded and shared.
Okay.
So thank you, everyone. Thanks, guys, for your presentation.